Hey everyone, Tim here, aka Renvale from Stormhaven Studios, Saga of Lucimia MMORPG, and welcome to episode 11 of Mondays in MMORPGs. Today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is Endgame. Specifically, we're going to talk about why I hate that term and why we don't have an endgame in the Saga of Lucimia. Before we get into that, though, there is a blog post that goes along with this, as always, and I'd urge you guys to not simply listen to the video, but go and actually read through the blog post because it has a lot of links to various different articles. The first one right off the bat is this piece from Sean Sullivan over at mmos.com, where he's talking about basically the failed concept of endgame. And I'm going to read a quote here. When I see players complaining that game X is boring, and they are met with the response, well, the game doesn't begin until you reach the end game, I have to pour myself a drink. Sean, kudos, because I feel the exact same way, as do most of us here on the team. The concept of the game not really beginning until you get to the end game is something that we find to be ridiculous. It's the primary reason why we decided, at least for our MMORPG, that only a very small fraction of that overall game content is going to be focused on the end game. Instead, the vast majority of content, and we're talking 85 to 90% of the game, is focused on the world itself, the lore, the stories, the overarching everything that makes up a world. And that's kind of what we're looking at, the adventures that players can have in between that entire environment. But perhaps one of my most favorite sections of this article is when it talks about, and I'm going to read a quote here again, the attitude is that tepid introductory content in an MMORPG is a requirement. It's on an imagined checklist before the game is considered finished, because an MMORPG isn't really an MMORPG without slogging through the mire of brain-dead NPC interaction quests. How else would we know what genre we're playing, right? Therefore, we should just ignore our early game criticisms because it's not the real game until we get to the end game. So remember when we went back to episode 1 of this series when I talked about milk runs, or those ridiculously vile repeatable fetch quests that the vast majority of MMORPGs use as filler content to push players to the cap as quickly as possible? That's exactly what we're talking about with this. When we're talking about in-game, we're talking about this concept of pushing people towards where the real game begins. That's just something that we're completely against. An MMORPG, for us, it should be something that's rich with storylines and lore and adventures that fill the entirety of the game, not just the end of the game. And that's one of the primary reasons we threw levels out the window and said, our game, our MMORPG, doesn't have levels, doesn't have experience points. If we only focused on level-based content, we're going to see the exact same problem that we see in most other MMORPGs, which is players pushing through levels as quickly as possible to get to the end, because that's the perceived real game, the end game. And we don't want players to do that. So we've kind of just stripped all of that out of the equation so that we don't have to focus on that. Instead, what we're doing is we're building our game on the concept of continual exploration and adventure. So what we want is a world that's vast enough and varied enough and filled with enough content that players can find a nearly limitless focus for their adventures. They can do anything they want rather than only being focused on this very limited linear path that takes them from point A to point B through a theme park environment. And that's not to say that a theme park is bad. They do have a place in MMORPGs, and they, especially when they serve a narrative purpose. And we do have a theme park in our game. The Volume 1 storyline could be considered a theme park, but it only represents about 10 to 15% of the actual game world. This is something where, it's a storyline that players are going to be progressing through, but it doesn't represent the overall world, which is the 85 to 90% of the content that's out there to explore. As you're reading through the blog post, go ahead and check the link to the most recent Developer Diaries episode that John and I recorded, because the whole episode was talking about our work on lore and storylines, quests, and world building, talking about all the things that we think set us apart from a lot of the other MMORPGs, because we're really focused on building a world. We've got the Volume 1 novel, we've got the homebrew D&D campaign that this was all started from, we've got the tabletop version that I'm working on right now, we've got the short stories that we published on the website, we've got some upcoming novellas that I'm going to be publishing this year that are set several centuries before this, during the Great War, when magic still existed. We're really trying to create something that players can immerse themselves into, as opposed to just something where players are going to be playing through a game. And I think that the other thing that really sets us apart from other MMORPGs is that we are designing our game with a definite end in mind. There are 4 volumes in the novels. There will be 4 volumes of the game. There's the base game and then 3 expansions. Beyond that, I've been very public about the fact that we don't foresee a continuation at this point in time anyways. We've very candidly spoken about this publicly, that more than likely we will sunset our game after the storylines are finished, or perhaps hand it off to the fans if they want to continue it into perpetuity once we've finished our primary storyline. And the reason for that is because I'm a big fan of how Babylon 5 did it, with a series that had a very specific beginning and a very specific end, rather than trying to spin things out into this never-ending cycle of repetitive content just to try to make money. I mean, a good example of this would probably be The Walking Dead. I did follow that series up through, I think, season 7, and at some point it's just fatigue. It's the same thing repeating over and over and over and over and over, because it's a cash cow, so they keep pushing out more content. And the way we look at it is, for us, this is a passion project. It's not a cash grab. It's never been about making money. We've been doing this for free for the past 4 years. We've turned down offers from publishers who wanted us to go free to play and put a cash up into our game. For us, this is our dream job. This is what we've always wanted to do. We have a love for the MMORPG genre. We feel that this is something we need to do. It's just something that's, it's like this passion that we can't get away from. And yes, we do have financial goals in mind, but at the same time, our goals and dreams for Stormhaven Studios aren't tied into the creation of a single title that we then limp along with for 20 years while we push out these generic expansions that are only focused on Endgame and generating a profit. So for us, we have a very specific story we want to tell, and that story has a very specific beginning and a very specific end. It's not just about those 2 things. It's about everything in between. So for us, that's why, at least for the MMORPG that we're building, we don't have an end game. We don't like that term. We're really trying to get away from that. We don't want players to only focus on that side of it. We want players to immerse themselves in the world. So what do you guys think? Do you like Endgame? Is that where you focus all of your time? Do you not care about the rest of the world? Is it all about the grind and rushing to the cap? Let us know what you think. Don't forget, we will be discussing this live at 8 p.m. Eastern on twitch.tv/Renfail on Monday night, which is the same night that this blog post and video goes live. So if you want to come talk about it live, join us tonight at 8 o'clock. We'll be there having fun, discussing things. Thanks to everybody who showed up last week. Last week was the first episode we did live. This will be the second episode we do live. Having a lot of fun doing these, so we're going to continue onwards. Don't forget to follow along, sagaoflucimia.com. If you got any questions, look us up, hit us up on Discord, etc. I'll see you guys tonight and in the next episode of Mondays in MMORPGs. Cheers, guys. Bye.